I had an exceptionally upsetting incident on my third job house sitting. To help you understand why it affected me so much, I should probably tell you about myself. I grew up in a single-parent home. My mom has always been a loving and understanding parent, but I think she felt pressure to find a new husband. My dad left us soon after I was born. She began dating almost immediately. This pressure caused her to make a lot of bad choices. She did the bar scene, constantly bringing home a new man. A few would stay, but not for long. She never seemed to understand that you don't find a husband in a place like that. Every relationship inevitably broke down into arguments and fighting, and on more than one occasion, the fights got physical on both sides. My mom's love of wine did a lot to inflame tensions. And because of this constant state of chaos, I became a people pleaser and hated confrontation. It's the big reason behind my panic attacks. I've worked a lot on my assertiveness, but I sometimes fall back into my old habits. My story starts in 2015. I was bouncing from job to job. I've been having a hard time finding something in my degree field. A friend had recently become a house sitter and made it sound fun. She made it sound like a permanent vacation, and I desperately needed one of those. She gave me a quick course on the ins and outs of the job and helped me land my first client. I was a ball of nerves, but I got through it. The second client went much smoother. It would be the third that would make me think twice about doing this long term. It was now mid-2016. I answered an ad asking for someone to sit a house a few hours away. This would be my first long-distance gig, and I didn't want to mess it up. I made a list of questions and showed them to my friend. She suggested a few changes, and I called the number. The homeowner and I made an appointment for me to view the property. I quickly made arrangements and drove up to meet him. He was a businessman, needing to leave town on short notice. My job would be to accept packages and mail, but most importantly, look after his dog. The dog's name was Bart. And when we first met, he didn't appear very interested in anything. He sniffed me once and returned to his bed. It all seemed simple enough. I asked a few questions, and at the end of the appointment, we both decided that I'd be perfect for the job. I checked into my hotel for the night and returned the following morning. My stay would be for 3 full nights, and I was looking forward to relaxing and maybe even playing with Bart. That afternoon, I tried to do just that. Bart wasn't interested, though. It was a beautiful sunny day. The slow, cool breeze in the shade made it feel like paradise. The home's slightly remote location allowed for a wonderfully peaceful environment. I felt calmer than I had in a very long time. Bart and I took a brief nap before going back inside for dinner. I ordered a pizza and cheesy bread. Afterwards, I opened a pint of ice cream I bought for such an occasion and parked my butt in front of the television. Bart was proving to be just as easy to handle as I'd hoped. He joined me on the couch and we watched a movie on Netflix. We had completed a little less than half of it before the doorbell began ringing. This wasn't your normal ringing, however. The person was pushing the button over and over again. It was now well after 5 p.m. and I wasn't aware of anyone visiting that late. I did briefly consider not answering it, but the incessant ringing made me think someone may need help. The woman I encountered on the opposite side of the door had very aggressive body language. I didn't say one word before she tore into me. She demanded to speak to the homeowner. I told her he was out of town on business. It didn't seem wise to let her know when he was to return. She didn't appear to believe me. As she spoke, she grew louder and became visibly angrier. I could feel myself getting increasingly nervous, and I did all I could to convince her. Then, she began cursing at me, calling me all these things and terrible words I'd rather not repeat here. She had convinced herself that I was the homeowner's new girlfriend. I hadn't noticed until just then, but Bart had walked up behind me. As he became more enraged, he grew more aggressive. The scene quickly became a cacophony of yelling and barking. I could feel a panic attack was on the way. I was completely overwhelmed by all of it. Bart's booming bark echoed through the hallway. It looked like he would attack her at any moment. And things would only get worse from here. I'm not sure what I said, but it set the woman off, and she lunged at me. Bart reacted by lunging at her. By some miracle, I was able to get the door closed before anyone was hurt. After that, Bart calmed down a bit. He backed away a few feet and sat down, but his eyes stayed glued to the door. I slid down the door and commenced suffering one of the worst panic attacks I've ever experienced. The woman continued screaming and pounding on the door, and I was sure that I was dying. To his credit, Bart stayed where he was and did nothing, and minutes passed and I was able to get enough control of myself to call the police. The operator did a fantastic job of talking me down. The police arrived and I made it clear that she attempted to assault me. The officers were understanding and took the woman away with them. I'm not sure if he was formally arrested, however. I was still very shaken. I was a heartbeat away from running back home. In any matter, I had to notify the homeowner of what had happened. He was extremely apologetic and begged me not to leave, but against my better judgment, I agreed to stay. Like I said, I tend toward being a people pleaser. Admittedly, leaving Bart alone after he tried to protect me would have been cruel. We finally agreed that my fee would be doubled. It did feel like extortion, and I knew it may affect my reputation, but I'd already decided this would be my last sitting job, so I accepted. I'd need all the money I could get until I found a new job anyway. The next 2 nights were calm and quiet. Bart stayed by my side the entire time. It made leaving that much harder. The homeowner and I had a brief conversation the morning he returned. He was still very apologetic and explained what may have caused the situation. He and the crazy woman had been dating, but he ended it because of her suspicious and controlling behavior. I didn't inquire any further, and I got the impression he was very embarrassed by her. I'd already been paid, so nothing was keeping me around any longer, except for Bart. I bent down and gave my hero a big hug and kiss on the nose. I could already feel the tears welling up. I didn't want to make a scene of myself, so I said goodbye and jogged away to my car. That was the worst and the last of my brief career in house sitting. And I'll miss it for a second, and as for Bart, that's a completely different story.
Did you enjoy the first story? If you did, I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel. Oh, if you want your broccoli to be served fresh, then don't forget to hit the bell icon. Keep munching.
For the past 2 years, I have worked for a service that places house sitters with clients in need of such people. Besides having to sit in 1 or 2 dirty homes, my job has been without note. There would be no indication that this following position would be any different. I arrived just before 7 a.m. as I was instructed. My clients were on their way out. They were a young couple with 1 child heading on their first family getaway since the pandemic began. The father left me with a few last instructions and they were on their way. The house itself was a nice 2-story structure you often see in more affluent areas of the country. Not my most posh assignment by far, but very comfortable nonetheless. I unpacked my things in the guest bedroom and made myself familiar with the home's layouts. From the look of things, my stay would be a quiet one. I expected to spend my times as I usually do, watching a film or 2 on streaming services or catching up on my YouTube subscriptions. For the first 3 days, everything played out as I had planned. It would be the 4th, which I'd be tested in a way I never thought possible. When I rose from bed that Sunday, the sun was just beginning to peek over the trees. I prefer to awake early when I am working just in case someone is scheduled to drop by. My livelihood relies on my good reputation. I never want to endanger that, and people do talk after all. Just after 7, I sat down to do some paperwork and heard a knock at the door. I answered, and a tall, muscular, older man introduced himself as Chris. He was the neighbor directly across the street. He proceeded to warn me about a recent string of home invasions happening in the city. Although there had been no indication these criminals had designs on the specific neighborhood, he felt it was necessary to let me know this. I assumed to keep my eyes open and stay safe, and we spoke a further few minutes before he said goodbye and I returned to my work. This news was somewhat concerning, but I felt safe. The family surely would have warned me. I assumed that Christopher was being overcautious and tried to put it out of my mind. The remainder of my afternoon was wasted in front of the television, a pastime I seem to enjoy more and more as I age. At around 5 p.m., I decided it may be time to make dinner. There were several large frozen meals available, so I heated one in the microwave. Just as I was sitting down to eat, a knocking came at the door. For the second time, Chris was there to warn me. Only this time, he insisted he had noticed an SUV with dark-tinted windows driving around. They had passed down the street several times. I was kind and didn't laugh in his face, but I wanted to. I thanked him and we went our separate ways once again. I now knew who he was. Most neighbors had that retired person that stares out their windows all day, waiting for the smallest thing to happen. And this must have been Christopher. Despite his entertaining behavior, his repeated interruptions were becoming a bother to me, I thought. And I was fortunate enough to avoid any further interactions with him for the remainder of the day. I slept and rose again just before dawn. I expected Chris would arrive soon, but I was able to enjoy my morning meal and paperwork without any further annoyances. Things were pleasantly quiet, and as I sat down to watch a film, I was beginning to believe that I may have the day to myself. Unfortunately, it was not to be. I had fallen asleep, and just after 2 p.m., a ringing of the doorbell shocked me from my sleep. I expected it to be Chris. However, as I peeked through the small window, I saw someone else, another man. He was well dressed, and I assumed was another neighbor. I put on my kindest smile and greeted this random stranger with a good morning. He looked a little confused but quickly regained his composure and asked for the homeowners. I informed him that they were out of town at the moment and told him when they would be expected back. And he just thanked me and smiled. Something about his smile was unsettling. I was unable to end the conversation before the man rushed toward the door. Out of nowhere, another man appeared and joined him. I tried to close the door, but the might of them together was too much for me. I was unsure what they wanted, but I was positive I needed to call for help as soon as possible. With no other option, I relinquished my hold on the door and ran. The men spilled in behind me. I had no immediate plan, but I noticed the stairs and sprinted up to the second floor. I just needed enough time alone to dial 911. Thankfully, I got it when I jumped into a hallway bathroom. The two men were close behind me, and fortunately, I was able to get the door closed and locked before they could reach me. I pulled my phone from my back pocket and dialed as quickly as possible. I could feel the men's bodies banging against the doors. The operator answered, and I gasped out my trouble between heaving breaths, and not long after, the banging stopped. A loud yelling and rumbling replaced it. Then I heard what sounded like a group of people running down the stairs. Everything went silent after that. The operator continued to talk. I put my ear to the door, and there was nothing for almost a minute. Then a faint voice said my name. It was weak at first. I almost thought it was my imagination, but then it came again. It was now much stronger and closer, and I realized it was Christopher. I meekly answered. I was still unsure of what was happening. "The men are gone. I got a piece of one of them, but I guess they didn't want no more." I did consider that this may be a trap, but I took a chance and opened the door. Standing in the hall was Chris with a bleeding cut above his right eye. He had a big grin across his face, and I got the impression he'd enjoyed his brief fight with the home invaders. We exchanged "Are you okays?" and I thanked him for arriving when he did, and I meant it this time. We met the police at the door and filled them in on what had happened. The paramedics fussed over Chris's cut, but he refused care, and we spent an hour giving statements. When all was said and done, I had to admit I owed Christopher a lot, perhaps even my life. It seems like he was just happy to be right. Once the officers had gone, he wished me luck and returned home. It wouldn't be until I was alone that the seriousness of it all hit me. I spent the evening curled up in a ball on the couch and stayed there until the following morning. I was still quite shaken up, but I was alive. Christopher and I would never speak again. Other than a smile and a wave when I visited the mailbox, life had returned to normal. I didn't want to ruin my client's vacation, so I waited until they returned and notified them of the attempted robbery. They were naturally horrified and even offered me more money. I, of course, refused. I did make sure to let them know that they had an amazing neighbor. And to my shock, they mentioned they had only spoken to him once in the 5 years they had lived there. This made our interactions over the last week seem even more special. I sometimes wonder if Christopher had been put in place to keep me safe, maybe like a guardian angel. I'm well aware of how foolish this sounds, but I believe it nonetheless. I'm pleased to say none of the other jobs have been quite as exciting as this was, and I have yet to meet another man as kind and selfless as Christopher. I know no amount of thanks can ever equal your actions. On that day, you saved another man's life, a complete stranger. Somewhere out there in the world, a man lives happy today because of your selfless act. May your life be long and happy, and may your family remember you forever.